This is the ARP Quadra. It was produced between 1978 and 1981 and is a really unique and rare analog multi-timbral polysynth from ARP. If you want to buy an original, it's going to cost you around £9,000, and that's if you can find one. The only ones I found listed are the ones you're seeing here, and they were listed and sold a couple of years ago. So for most mere mortals, it's just an interesting museum piece that was used by loads of acts in the 80s, but will never be something we can get our hands on, let alone own. But this is the new Cherry Audio Quadra. So we can now have a play with an emulation, get our hands on those distinct 80s tones, like the ones you're hearing in the background and the intro track, all for the introductory bargain price of $39. And what exactly is this? Because looking at the interface, it really reminds me of walking into music stores in the late 90s when everyone was selling the analog synths, and you'd be surrounded by loads of weird and wonderful looking synths with impenetrable interfaces that looked absolutely nothing like one another, and ARPs were just a complete mystery to me. But check out my videos on Patreon showing you how to get to grips with any synth, as they're nearly all based around the same building blocks and workflow now. And for the price of a coffee a month, you'll help support this sort of content. I'll put the link in the description. Anyway, this was and still is one of those weird looking synths, because essentially it's 4 synths in one. So from the left, we've got the bass, the strings, polysynth, output mixer in the middle, and then the lead synth on the right hand side. The original had independent outputs for each of those synths, and so does this. If we're in the DAW here, and here's the track you've been listening to in the background. And this synth here is playing all these parts. The main out's playing the effects. Then we've got the strings, an organ, and then the art, and that's all coming through this. Where the main volume is basically the volume for the effects. The individual volumes are set in your DAW. And in the mixer, we can see we've got faders for each of those. So I'm controlling the art, and we can automate that as well. So thinking of it, bass, strings, polysynth and lead, it's a fantastic way of getting the most out of analog circuitry. In one synth, you could play all parts. You didn't need a bass synth and a monosynth and a polysynth. You just needed an ARP Quadra. So let's dig in. We'll start off with the overall interface. And if you've used any of Cherry Audio's other instruments, you'll know what's happening here. We've got a little keyboard we can use, which is super handy. We can resize things. This is on a really big monitor at the minute. Looks great. You can have it standalone. You can use it in your DAW. I've got it standalone here. We can control it via MIDI. I've got this set up with a key step 37 at the minute, so you'll see my mouse is over on the left-hand side, but I'm still managing to magically move the VCF and the resonance on the polysynth section. We've also got this focus mode where we can zoom right in, so you can have it nice and small in your DAW, but focusing on the section that you want to look at. We also get, I think it's 400 different presets. That's a fair amount. We've also got oversampling up here. If we listen to this, you can hear there's a lot of aliasing going on there. But oversampling on, much smoother. So everything we've come to expect from Cherry Audio, except with this one, you don't actually get the opportunity to change the interface colour. Maybe a different interface colour would just change the buttons from blue and green to yellow and pink or something. Anyway, let's move on to the actual synth then, and to see how it works. So we've got the synths along the top, and we can set the range of these across the keyboard. Just click learn, and I'll just play a couple of notes on the bass one. So 67 to 96, there we go. Or you can click on them and just change them by note. And you can see that each synth's got its own unique engine, and they're like cut down versions of what you might expect. So a cut down version of something to produce a bass, a cut down version of something to produce strings, poly, lead sound. In fact, they remind me of the weird esoteric little strange synths you'd see going for nothing or being thrown away back in the 90s. So let's start off with the bass. And you'll notice it's super simple. We don't really have any control over the tone whatsoever. And each of the sections is quite limited, but have different levels of complexity. But it's astounding the variation you can get from it. So just flicking through some of the bass presets there, and they're using different combinations of the various synths, but hopefully shows how versatile it can be. So what exactly do we have here on the bass? We've got just two tones really. We've got the electric bass and the string bass. Let's just turn everything else off in the output mixer. So by clicking on it, you're effectively muting that part. We're listening to just the electric bass here. Let's turn the echo off. This is how you turn the effects on and off for each part, down on the bottom. So we've brought in the 8-foot oscillator there. If we take that out, I'm hitting keys and we don't hear anything, and that's the same with all the synths. So we've got two playing there, but you can't detune them. These are divide down oscillators, so almost like a sub. So we don't have any control over the tone, but we do have this decay on the envelope that modulates this resonance, which is the filter effectively, but you only have control over the resonance. Super, super simple. And that's it for the electric bass, but we do have this string bass here, so we'll take the electric bass out. Hear nothing, bring the string bass in. We can't hear anything, and that's because this goes through the strings module. Why isn't it in the strings module, you might ask? And that's because on the original you might play the string bass with your left hand and you don't want it overlapping with the polysynth, for example. So more to do with the range than actually where the sound's coming out of. So nothing, let's bring in the strings. We're not playing any strings here. We can see we're not playing the 4-foot or the 8-foot. So we're just playing the string bass. And here we've got an AR envelope. And we've got a low and a high EQ. If we turn the bass all the way down in the output mixer, we can still hear it. Because it's coming from the strings. So we could have all 4 of those oscillators playing. Get some nice fat tones out of that. And we've got single or multi-note trigger for the envelope on the bass as well. So over to the strings, and we've just seen them really, haven't we? Let's take the bass out, so we can click in the output mixer to take the electric bass out, or click down here to take the oscillators out. Strings, let's bring them in on a 8-foot. Simple AR envelope. It all goes through the strings chorus generator circuit, and there's no parameters for us to tweak on that. And that is a sawtooth. We can also have a hollow wave. And on the original, the choice between the sawtooth and this hollow wave was shared between the strings and the poly. Here we've got a lot more flexibility on the poly, which we'll come to in a second. And the only thing I really wanted to show here was this is a single envelope, even if we're playing 5 notes, for example. They don't all have individual envelopes. They're not all building it with individual attack times. which is exactly the same as we have on the Poly. So let's move over to the Poly. We've got an ADSR envelope here, and this is a single one. Again, let's just turn the strings off, bring the Poly in the output mixer. All those notes are sharing the same envelope. And this is the second most complex, I suppose, of these synths. We've got various waves here. We can have, is that, some sort of sawtooth is this one, all odd harmonics. Let's turn the cutoff up. Yes, we've got a filter here. We've got cutoff and resonance. Let's turn it up. So all of a sudden we are a lot more flexible. We've got 3 oscillators, or 3 octaves at least. Be careful with those volumes. But we can't detune them in any way. We do have this drift button here. Which adds some sort of drift. I'm not sure exactly what it's doing. But with these being divide down oscillators, you didn't have anything like that on the original. Just adds a little bit more analogness to it. So the filter. And just an FYI, I'm using this on 1x quality rather than anything else, because I'm videoing this screen and it's a 4K screen, and the laptop's freaking out. So I do have to do this in normal quality, not in oversampled highest quality. And you can hear there that went slightly out of tune, and that's because we do have aftertouch on this. That's just me wiggling the key. We can use the LFO to modulate the pitch and the filter. And that's the first time we've encountered the LFO. We've got just a single LFO on this, and we'll take a look at that later. And we can use the LFO or the ADSR to modulate the pulse width. So let's put it onto a pulse. Let's take this off. Let's add some strings and some electric bass to that as well, shall we? Just to see what happens. Yep, sounds like an old 80s synth, doesn't it? So finally, we've got the lead synth, and this is by far the most complex. We've actually got 2 distinct separate VCOs that we can tune. So let's turn the others off. Listen to the lead on its own. Turn up a little bit. So on these we can pick different wave shapes. They're slightly different to what we get on the Poly. We get noise in here, but we don't get these strange sort of wave shaping ones. Detune it. Just like the Poly, it's got its own VCF and its own ADSR. And we can modulate the pulse width with the ADSR or the LFO. Should we quickly do that? Let's put a pulse on 1. Let's turn oscillator 2 off for now. And we've got proper control of the actual tunings of these. Let's bring oscillator 2 in as well. Use the ADSR. Independent portamento, LFO to the pitch. So all quite standard stuff, but things to note are this trill, this is cool. The trill interval set up on the top left of the lead. Instant chip tune. A bit mad. And it's also duophonic. So we're just playing the lead there, don't forget. We're playing 2 notes at a time, duophonic, just like something like the Odyssey. The lead synth's also got this arpeggiator, which is simple but effective. It does exactly what you expect it. But what's nice is that the other synths don't go through it. So as with that intro track, I had the lead synth playing on arpeggiator and the bass and the poly doing something else. All via the same MIDI track. Last thing to note on the lead synth is that we can remove keyboard tracking from VCO2. What's the point in that, I hear you say? If we look along here, we can't see anything that's modulated by VCO2 except for the LFO and the sample and hold circuit. So let's take a look at that. The LFO's got 5 wave shapes, which include sample and hold. And just as with the Odyssey and things, we can change the input to the sample and hold. Normally you have noise. So what should we modulate? Should we modulate the cutoff of the polysynth or the lead synth? So we'll modulate the cutoff with the lead with the LFO. It's doing exactly what we expect. Let's just turn these onto sawtooth to make them a slightly simpler sound. All very nice. Bring in VCO2, then you get much more repeatable patterns. So take the tracking off VCO2. This puts it into a low frequency mode. So you can hear that's a lot less random. Back onto noise. Let's do it faster. So noise is completely random, VCO2. You can hear that's a sawtooth rising. Let's do, I don't know, triangle. So that's very nice, and we can control the amount with the mod wheel. That's just me playing with the mod wheel. That sort of brings me to the end, except for this thing called the phase shifter. That's basically like a phaser, and that was on the original. So we can see that links to the sample and hold here as well. Let's put this on. So put it to the lead synth. So we're using the VCO2 there as the source for the LFO again. Got internal. So it's got its own LFO. Or we can use the ADSR from the lead synth as well. But I just thought I'd show that quickly because it was on the original and it's quite cool. So we've got Quadra's flanger, echo and reverb unit. I'm not going to go into them. Maybe just to show you that the echo doesn't self-oscillate. Let's put the lead through that. Quite a simple thing, but if you want one that self-oscillates, go and get their space echo emulation. And the reverb's nice, actually. This plate's nice and big. Oh, that's the oversampling coming in. Bring it in again. So that does bring me to the end. And what are my final thoughts? Well, unlike the ARP 2600 or the Jupiter 4, this isn't a hugely well-known synth, so it's great that Cherry Audio have emulated it. Does it sound exactly like an ARP Quadra? I've got absolutely no idea, but I do know that other Cherry Audio software I've tested versus my hardware does sound close and can sound identical in places, but like almost everyone else on the planet, I've no way of comparing them. And in a way, I don't think it really matters, to me at least. These emulations aren't about getting the exact minutiae of the tones. It's about how the sounds are put together, how you're constrained by the vintage hardware limitations, which makes a patch sound like a vintage tone. So if you're making synthwave and you want to make sure you're getting original 80s sounding patches, things like this are excellent. Things like the single envelope on the Polysynth and the strings, for example, just bring that little extra touch. So I like it for the fun of playing with a £9,000 vintage synth without spending £9,000 and without worrying about it breaking or where I'm going to put it. So for $39, it's well worth a look. It gives a different perspective on sound design. You can come at this from an unexpected perspective and make some patches you wouldn't normally make, throwing out some ideas, bringing a fresh outlook maybe. So download the demo and give it a go. And I hope that was useful to somebody somewhere, and if it was, please subscribe, ring the bell, share, join me on Patreon, etc., etc., and I will see you soon.